Please listen, this has been a intense, reckless week that the American citizens here in America has had to deal with pertaining to high-ranking offenses in regard to illegitimacies and crimes that have been brought forth to the American people in this regard. Please listen.
Can you help us understand what is legal and illegal about foreign intelligence services being involved in U.S. elections, and what should American people and the American public, and especially American campaign operatives, know about what's appropriate and not appropriate to take in the form of help from foreign intelligence agencies?
I mean, that's a very broad topic. What is legal and illegal? I mean, can you refine that a little bit?
Attorney General William Barr's thoughts on foreign election interference have taken on new significance this week, to say the least. Barr was named in the whistleblower complaint that has put Donald Trump in the most dire jeopardy of his presidency, in alleging that the president made efforts to solicit Ukrainian interference in the 2020 election. The whistleblower called out two key Trump people by name. Quote, "The president's personal lawyer, Mr. Rudolph Giuliani, is a central figure in this effort. Attorney General Barr appears to be involved as well." The whistleblower went on to implicate White House lawyers and other administration officials who allegedly worked to cover up the call, while Giuliani quickly sought to defend himself by implicating the State Department in the scheme.
Insiders saying, "You mucked this up." Your response?
Man, I really did. And you know who I did it at the request of? The State Department. I never talked to a Ukrainian official until the State Department called me and asked me to do it. And then I reported every conversation back to them. And Laura, I'm a pretty good lawyer, just a country lawyer, but it's all here, right here. The first call from the State Department, the debriefing of the State Department.
So why are they... Oh, and that's no idle finger pointing either. The Secretary of State himself, Mike Pompeo, just last week, peddled Trump's conspiracy theories about Joe Biden and Ukraine.
I hope that we will. I hope that if Vice President Biden engaged in behavior that was inappropriate, I hope the American people will come to learn that.
We've seen no evidence of that yet, but I want to go back to the question. America cannot have our elections
interfered with. America cannot have our elections interfered with. And if that's what took place there, if there was that kind of activity engaged in by Vice President Biden, we need to know.
And last night, Pompeo became the first recipient of a subpoena in the House impeachment inquiry. 3 House committees requested documents and witnesses from Pompeo related to Donald Trump's conversation with the Ukrainian president. So how did we get here? Where White House lawyers and government officials would put their reputations and law licenses on the line for a president who would so blatantly violate the law and his oath of office and damage America's national security. And that list of government officials includes the acting director of national intelligence, who this week could not seem to explain why he took the whistleblower's complaint to the offices of the very people named in it, the White House and the DOJ. Trump's former lawyer and fixer, Michael Cohen, who did Trump's bidding for a decade and is now spending 3 years in prison for helping to cover up Trump's misdeeds, tried to warn us, Trump associates, and the Republicans of the dangers of doing said dirty work.
He doesn't give you questions. He doesn't give you orders. He speaks in a code.
Donald Trump said, "I would like you to do us a favor, though."
My ambition and the intoxication of Trump power had much to do with the bad decisions, in part, that I made.
A quote, meeting or phone call between the president and President Zelensky of Ukraine would depend on whether he showed willingness to, quote, play ball.
This is his country. He's becoming an autocrat.
I want to know who's the person that gave the whistleblower, who's the person that gave the whistleblower the information, because that's close to a spy. You know what we used to do in the old days when we were smart, right, with spies and treason? We used to handle it a little differently than we do now.
I can only warn people, the more people that follow Mr. Trump, as I did blindly, are going to suffer the same consequences that I'm suffering.
And joining me now, Jonathan Capehart of The Washington Post, MSNBC contributor Barbara McQuaid, Naveed Jamali, author of How to Catch a Russian Spy, Michael Isikoff of Yahoo News, MSNBC legal analyst Glenn Kirshner, and David Korn, author of Russian Roulette. Thank y'all for being here. And Jonathan, the list of people named in this whistleblower complaint who are apparently willing to assist in the cover-up of this call, and we now know that there may have been other calls that were secreted in a similar way to other autocrats, to the Prince of Saudi Arabia, or to even Vladimir Putin. Here's the list just in the Ukraine call. Obviously, Donald Trump, Rudolph Giuliani, his attorney, William Barr, his other attorney, who also is called the U.S. Attorney General, Vice President Mike Pence, Kurt Volker, who just resigned as Special Representative to Ukraine, Gordon Sondland, the U.S. Ambassador to the EU, John Durham, U.S. Attorney. As somebody who works as a Washington journalist, is there any precedent for this level of willingness to obey a leader who is so blatantly violating his oath of office and to essentially put their own reputations down the drain for this president?
Not that I can remember. What's different between this administration and all the other administrations, at least in my lifetime, that came before him, is that those administrations had a respect for the institutions, had a respect for the presidency, had a respect for the Constitution and the oath to that Constitution. What we have seen since Inauguration Day, actually since the campaign, is a person who is now President of the United States who does not revere the Constitution, has no respect for it, has no respect for the office, has no respect for his duties as not only leader of the United States, leader of the free world, but also a protector of democracy. So the fact that you have people within the administration, what was breathtaking to me in that graphic that you just showed was the number of people and the positions that they hold.
Right.
If you cannot trust the Attorney General of the United States to hold the president accountable and to stand up for the rule of law and to ensure that the oath of office is adhered to, then we're in deep trouble. And the fact that you have not only the Attorney General of the United States, but the Secretary of State, White House lawyers who are getting involved and trying to help cover this up, says that we are in much more perilous times than we actually realize. And the fact that that the administration is moving conversations with foreign leaders onto a national security server that is limited by out of necessity, given things that are talked about, but not because the conversations are sensitive, but because what the president is doing, as we've seen from the notes of the call, just in their face are wrong.
His intent, his motives, the way that he's going about manipulating various leaders to politically prosper and achieve his objectives.
And I think that's why this has taken on such fascination, because it's one thing for us to sit around and talk about the Mueller report and the complexities and whatever, and the American people don't quite know where to land with Ukraine. It's so easy. And the fact that they put out those notes and the fact that the whistleblower complaint is out and everyone can read and see with their own two eyes what's going on, the president's corrupt, the president's people are corrupt, and now it's just a matter of how are we going to hold them accountable, and then can they truly be held accountable, since the Senate is run by Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, and
Right.
at this point, he ain't going to have a trial.
Yeah.
For those who are not aware of Ukraine forced themselves away from the old USSR towards trying to establish a democracy type government. Since then, it's been nothing but a bloodbath that's went on over there pertaining to the old Soviet Union practices and policies towards trying to destroy Ukraine, because Ukraine wanted to do things in a diplomatic way, similar to how we do things over here pertaining to voting in and voting out their leaders. I personally put Ukraine right there beside Yugoslavia, or not Yugoslavia, but the people down there in South America, Venezuela, that are wanting to break away from that type of tyranny. Keep in mind, it was Ronald Reagan that demonized the old Soviet Union to the point of telling Gorbachev to tear down that wall. That was a wall of communism that was controlling their people in a evil, demonic way, to the point of the leaders being nothing but oligarchs that was controlling the middle class and the poor class. It goes on over here in America to some extent, pertaining to those who was not fortunate enough to make it to the top. But there is still a bleak, very bleak now, chance that you can still make it to the top if you're determined enough and smart enough towards being involved with the right people at the right time at the right place. You keep in mind that this country over here has been so spoiled for so many years pertaining to being able to say and almost do whatever that they wanted to say and do, to the point that they cannot sympathize with people that are going through such harshness as the people over in the Ukraine or Venezuela or in other parts of the nation, or not the nation, but the planet, because there is still people today that are subject to not only persecution but death if they stand up against their leadership. Over in Saudi Arabia, if you stand up against their dynasty over there, you're subject of not just being brutally persecuted, but killed. The same way over in places of China, the same way in other parts of the world, that if you stand up against their parliament or their dynasty or their government, whatever that you want to call it, you are subject of getting the ultimate persecution, which is the persecution of death. Over here in America, as long as your conversations and as long as your doings is non-threatening by our standards and by our laws, they're not supposed to be attacking you. But now the Windmill Ministries was attacked since 1989, going through a pattern of sequences again and again and again, either by state or states, more than one, or federal government that tried to eradicate the very essence of the Windmill Ministries fulfillment pertaining to biblical Bible prophecy. And I truly believe that that is what has put this country in peril, because of all the illegitimacies that various state, local, and federal officials have been committing upon to their citizens. That's the reason why that we're seeing all this horror that has befallen upon to our lives, regardless whether it's drug addiction pertaining to drug overdoses, or gun addiction pertaining to all these mass shootings, or almost $23 trillion now in debt, and 2.3 million incarcerated prisoners pertaining to state, federal, etc., etc. We're seeing this country fall off into a state of peril, to the point that it's becoming more and more abstract and dangerous, even in the political arena, of seeing such developing here in America. Please listen to this, because this is very, very important. It's imperative that we understand where we are, how we got where we are, towards being able to work our way out of this position that we're all in right now. Please listen.
I mean, and Glenn Kirshner, I think of, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm familiar with the term, with the concept of consciousness of guilt, because what you're now seeing is a couple of things happening. This whistleblower complaint comes out. For some reason, the DNI decides to take it to the White House. The president is named in it, and to the Department of Justice, both of whom essentially say you don't have to turn this over. You don't have to follow the law. The behavior of lawyers in this has been pretty strange. And then let's go to Mr. Giuliani, whose immediate reaction is not to say, I didn't rob the bank, but to say, here's my phone where the bank manager gave me all the codes to get in. He turns over Mike Pompeo. Let's listen to him doing that on Fox News.
Pompeo is unhappy with you. Is that true? I know both of you. I haven't heard about this except from Maggie Haber.
I actually think they should all congratulate me, because if it weren't for me, nobody would have uncovered and faced massive corruption by the Vice President of the United States. In fact, I'm a legitimate whistleblower, and his State Department, asked me to do this. So, Mike, if you're unhappy with me, I'm sorry, but I accomplished my mission. And I have no idea if he's unhappy with me or not. I frankly don't care.
Have you ever seen attorneys, Glenn, a prosecutor, he was a prosecutor, behave in this way?
No, Joy, but I have seen co-conspirators behave in this way when they start pointing fingers at each other. And Can I tell you, that is a career prosecutor's dream. I mean, you can look out the window and you can almost see the buses rolling down the street, under which President Trump will begin to throw these people.
The gauntlet. What we're looking at is a repeat of Clint Eastwood, The Gauntlet.
You've got Giuliani, who is basically making what I would call a co-conspirator admission, holding up his phone and saying, yes, this improper thing that we just saw the president do by virtue of that summary. It's not a transcript. It's a summary of the phone call that he had with the Ukrainian president. This improper thing he did, hey, the State Department told me to do it. And now you're going to have Pompeo pointing the finger at Giuliani. And Joy, I can only suspect that when this comes home to roost, the president will be pointing the fingers at everybody else, saying, hey, that was just like he said, oh, you got to ask Michael Cohen about my hush money payments. I don't know anything about it. Michael Cohen ends up in prison. Yep. Didn't we just hear him say, hey, you got to ask Rudy Giuliani what he did there over in Ukraine? It really has the same feel, and I suspect the president is going to begin pointing fingers when all the heat is focused on him.
Yeah, and Barbara McQuade, he already sort of did that to the vice president. He said, hey, why don't you check his phone calls as well? So already the blame is being spread around. But I want to come back with you, Barbara McQuade, to the Attorney General.
A circus.
I misspoke in the previous segment speaking with the Congresswoman about impeachment because, William Barr, I guess, was on my mind because this is somebody who is supposed to be the Attorney General of the United States. In two other countries, in Great Britain and in Israel, those two prime ministers are also in legal trouble because their attorneys general are looking into potential illegal activities that they may have committed. In our country, this Attorney General could not say whether it would be, in fact, illegal to seek help from a foreign country. He couldn't say it at his confirmation. And he seems to have done nothing other than try to protect Donald Trump from the consequence of his actions. And now it appears that his Department of Justice intervened to protect himself. How does he avoid Mr. Barr being called before Congress? Because he is named in this whistleblower complaint, and his DOJ tried to stop Congress from getting it.
What we have here in this circus atmosphere is the blind leading the blind, and they didn't think that the general public was going to be smart enough to identify the illegitimacies that had been conducted by upper levels of government. And now, since they realize that the ship may be going down and the rats are dispersing off the ship now they're blaming each other because they realize that they have gotten caught up into their own illegitimate atmosphere to the point that now the blame is going to fall upon to the feet of those who the American people put so much trust in, put so much valuable trust in, that now the American people are realizing, well, these are just a bunch of shysters. These are just a bunch of illegitimate people that wasn't following the rule of law and trying to basically stuff their own pockets pertaining to their own successes at our expense. And how many different administrations have we seen follow the same characteristics again and again and again? Now, whenever Donald Trump talks about draining the swamp, hypothetically speaking, that sounds good. It sounds very good. Let's drain the swamp. But it's kind of like voting somebody off the island. Remember that little sequence that they had? I think they still got it out there, towards survival. And the last person standing was the person that basically got voted off the island. Well, how are you going to vote somebody off the island whenever they own the island? Whenever you're looking at a constitutional crisis, in which this is what this is turning into, it's now reaching a boiling point to where now it's starting to surface. This is the illegitimacy troubles that you run into towards watching these developments get worser and worser and worser as each other is pointing the finger at each other, saying, well, it's your fault. No, it's your fault. No, it's your fault. Well, my analogy to the problem is that it's everybody's fault, including the American people, because we should have paid more closer attention to what was going on and what was being said and how it was being said and in the intent of why it was being said. Some of us was born tonight, but we wasn't born last night. And now, since all this is beginning to surface in the way that it's surfacing, now the common folk down here amongst the crowd is beginning to see the same thing. Oh my God, is what they're saying. I can't believe what I'm seeing. Well, you better believe it, because it's happened and happening and has happened in the past in other administrations. And how to straighten this out, how to make them walk the line, as Johnny Cash used to sing the song Walking the Line, is a task in and of itself.
Yeah, I think at the very least he can expect to be subpoenaed to testify. I know he has denied knowing anything about or having any contact with Ukraine whatsoever. So although President Trump had said, I want you to talk to William Barr says that never happened. Nonetheless, I think that Congress deserves answers about what President Trump said in that phone call about William Barr. The part of William Barr's behavior that we do know, though, that I think raises some questions is the fact that he did decide that transcript did not need to be turned over as the law requires under the Whistleblower Protection Act to Congress. It says that the Director of National Intelligence shall provide it to members of Congress.
Shall.
And because his name is mentioned in that report, he should have recused himself, I believe, from making that decision. Even if it's not true, there is the appearance of a conflict of interest that he had an incentive to withhold that document, not because he thought it was legally required to withhold it, but because it would cause him personal embarrassment. And so I think the fact that he participated in that decision was improper and raises enough speculation, I think, to call him before Congress. There's also the report that the Public Integrity section of the criminal division looked at the call and made a decision that it did not amount to campaign finance violations. Maybe not, but did they really look at it only that narrowly? Because it could have been seen as bribery, as extortion, as conspiracy to defraud the United States, or even an impeachable offense. And so I think he has some answers to give to Congress, and I will predict that he gets a subpoena with his name on it very soon.
Based upon the intent. Based upon the intent. Once more, it's not what you say, but how you say it. What's behind all of this? You know, Donald Trump will get up there and say, well, for surely to God, you know that I'm doing it all for the benefit and the favor of the American people. Yeah, that's what you say on the front end. But whenever you get to looking through all the rigmarole, who's the one that's actually going to benefit from all this? The way that you've set it up. Is it going to be the American people? Is it going to be the people over in Ukraine that is considered one of our allies because they're wanting to break away from such communism control? Such tyranny? So, the plot thickens. Oh, what a tangled web we do weave. When first we look and then we realize, oh wow, we've been deceived. We're running into the same type of scenario towards getting caught up into a web of deceit, a web of defiance, a web of greed, a web of illegitimacy statements, either coming from Rudy Giuliani or coming from the President of the United States. It's become an atmosphere of a circus. And this is my concern. While we are paying close attention to these matters, what's going on across the pond pertaining to Iran and Iraq and Afghanistan and Libya and the Middle East pertaining to Israel, what's going on with the Saudi Arabian government, what's going on with that whole region over there in the Middle East. While we're being diverted in paying close attention to our officials here in the United States, what's going on with Russia, what's going on with China, what's going on with other parts of the world that we should be paying close attention to, because now we're being diverted towards looking at these matters instead of looking at the matters across the pond. So this is as clear as a bell whenever it comes to danger, Will Rogers, pertaining to that little robot that used to walk around, and as soon as he discovered something that didn't look right, he started going off towards danger. This is dangerous. This is a high-stake game. And the thing about this game, it costs its people's lives. Just like our health care. You know, whenever you're talking about people that's suffering because of diabetes and other types of diseases, this ain't something that you just read about in some sort of fictitious book. This is actually occurring here in the United States. Whenever you're talking about our bridges and our roads crumbling and falling apart because we had to divert the money from working on the road that needed the potholes fixed this year towards delegating it over to officials to make sure that they stayed in power, it's gotten serious. And whenever you continue to do this again and again and again, then you start to see the erosion of the infrastructure start to basically fall apart. And that's what we're looking at. We're looking at danger. We're looking at, just as the Bible talks about, that in the last days we will be living in perilous times, because once things get this serious, people start doing things that is not common or ordinary. Whenever people start realizing that their lives is at stake here, their careers are at stake here, their whole livelihood is at stake here towards what that they have invested in, that's whenever people start making unrational, illegitimate decisions and start fulfilling those illegitimate decisions in extreme, dire ways.
Just explain this concept of spoliation of evidence. I mean, with regard to Mr. Barr, can you just explain? It's a legal concept, I guess, that has to do with what might have happened in terms of hiding the evidence of, or covering up evidence of a crime. Barbara.
Oh, for me. Sure. I mean, I think we heard someone say earlier this idea of consciousness of guilt. When evidence is withheld, there is crimes of obstruction of justice and others, and sometimes people dismiss that as mere process crimes. But prosecutors consider those to be some of the most significant crimes there are, because it prevents prosecutors and investigators from getting to the bottom of something. And so withholding documents is often an indicator that people know that what's inside those documents is very damning.
And Michael Isikoff, I want to go to Mr. Volker. We heard earlier that he is somebody who works for the McCain Institute. He's somebody who's quite respected. He just resigned. He now, I'm sure, can be expected to have to testify before Congress. I wonder what you expect from that testimony, what it might be. I want to show you really quickly to Rudolph Giuliani is also, while he's showing his phone, also showed text messages between himself and Mr. Volker. There's a text that says, "Mr. Mayor, really enjoyed breakfast this morning. As discussed, connecting you here with Andrew Yermak, who was very close to President Zelensky. I suggest we schedule a call together on Monday, maybe 10 a.m. or 11 a.m. Washington time. Kurt." So essentially, Giuliani is showing that to prove that Mr. Volker was helping him get in contact with leaders in Ukraine, ostensibly trying to show that he had official sanction for trying to pursue whatever deals and dirt he was looking for in that country.
Right. Look, I think Ambassador Volker is going to be one of the most crucial witnesses as this unfolds, and I believe he's due to be deposed this coming week. Clearly, Giuliani is resting a lot on this message and his conversations with Volker. I think people close to Volker have indicated he was not at all happy about the role he found himself in and the pressure he was getting on this. So exactly what he says is going to be, very important in figuring out where this goes. It's also worth remembering that Volker was in Kiev speaking to President Zelensky the day after the call, so he can certainly shed light on how Zelensky contemporaneously reacted to what the president said on that call.
Yeah, and David, so what you have here is a scandal about a phone call to the president of Ukraine. But at the end of the day, this is still about Russia. It's still about Donald Trump's weird relationship to and fealty to Russia, no?
Yeah, exactly. The original sin and betrayal of the Trump presidency is all about Russia. Mike and I wrote a book about this. But if you look at what the conversation that came out this week with Zelensky, people focus on the Biden aspect of this. Give me dirt on Joe Biden. But the first thing he asked Zelensky about, the very first thing was, there's this crazy right-wing conspiracy theory that's really, really deep in the sub basement of the world of paranoia conservatives. And that's that somehow the DNC server, the Democratic Party server, which was hacked by the Russians, really wasn't hacked by the Russians, and that for some reason the DNC gave, and a computer security company gave the server to Ukraine somehow, to an oligarch there to hide it from the FBI. I mean, it's completely nuts, but it's all about dismissing the Russia investigation. And why does Trump want to do that? Because he knows he's guilty. We saw what happened with Manafort, and even the latest Washington Post story about him telling the Russians in the Oval Office that he didn't care about Russia. He doesn't want any of that stuff to come out. So Giuliani's job there was not just to get dirt on Biden, but was to dismiss the whole Russian stuff, which plagues him to this day, and may even surpass the newest revelations may even surpass the story that we now have about Ukraine.
And you know, to me, I think that is the key point here, right? Is that the attempt to inoculate Russia, that request comes even before. And he's talking about CrowdStrike, which is what David is referring to, that he wants this proof that Russia really didn't do it. Because it does seem that Donald Trump is pretty determined to get Russia back into the G7, make it the G8 again, maybe have the, welcome back party at his own resort. And that just seems to be consistent. But I want to ask you about on the call itself. So you now have the Ukrainians saying, oh, well, we didn't know that our side was going to be put out. We didn't know that our side of that conversation was going to come out, because now that creates other issues for the president within his own country, political issues. And now you have Russia saying, well, we certainly hope our calls aren't going to come out. So I wonder now if there's just one whistleblower, or should we expect now that we might find out, get readouts in some way of some of the other conversations, perhaps even a conversation with Vladimir Putin?
Yeah, no, that's, I believe we will, and I'll tell you why I believe that, because I think what we're seeing now is nothing short of a coup against the Constitution by the White House. I mean, this is, look, I'm pissed. I don't know what to put. When I think about Pompeo, when I think about Giuliani, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised to hear this about Trump, as David just said. I mean, this is behavior that fits his life to a pattern. I mean, this is exactly what he does. What disturbs me, though, is to hear that, these transcripts were hidden in the intelligence community. As someone who served in the intelligence community for 13 years, who spent 10 years essentially guarding our country's secrets, I went to bed at night, every night, feeling confident that guarding those secrets was nothing short of protecting this country. I did not believe that guarding those secrets was protecting a president from criminal wrongdoing. And the fact that the rank and file, that people below Pompeo, below the Attorney General, actually did this, actually loaded those transcripts, is a violation to their oath of office. They swore an oath to protect and defend the Constitution. We have one whistleblower who took his oath seriously and reported it as he should have done.
Right.
And I only hope that other people who are party in this, who are aware of this, who follow these orders, understand the concept of superior orders, which is something that we've learned from the Nazis, that you cannot, I understand that it might ruin your career, that it might be something that causes you great personal strife, but you have a duty to the Constitution. If someone orders you to do something illegal, you have the right and the duty to speak out. And I think that the fact that these people thought that they could, essentially corrupt the intelligence community in something we do incredibly well, which is guard secrets, to guard a secret that potentially implicates the president in criminal wrongdoing, tells us that this administration is rotten to the absolute core.
And Michael, I'll start with you on this. Is there any information, any reporting as to why Mr. McGuire, the DNI, who was a pretty respected guy, would have run right to the White House with this whistleblower report rather
Well,
than...
I mean, he testified that he immediately concluded that the complaint involved, potential executive privilege issues because it involved conversations by the president.
And I think I can speak here for the majority of the American people. We know that there's decisions that gets made pertaining to one leader of one nation or country to another that the majority of us could care less about. We could care less about the rhetoric that's being conducted between one leader towards another. But whenever it starts to inhere upon to the benefit of our safety and security, whenever it starts to infringe upon to why we ever put them in office to begin with, was to protect and withhold our safety and our Constitution, then is whenever the American people, the common folk, I call them the common folk, start scratching their heads and saying, we see now what kind of system that is being set up before us, which is very, very condemning in and of itself towards do as I say and not as I do. Do as I say and not as I do. And we see that not only on a big scale pertaining to the federal government, but we also see that on a little scale pertaining to various county officials that was elected to withhold and uphold the law. But yet now, whenever they get on their little airplanes and they go to wherever that they go, or they go down to Florida or down to Phoenix, Arizona to spend the winter, there ain't no telling us what they're involved in doing and who they're involved in doing it with. The very people that the local, on a local level, that has hired these people to withhold the law are now breaking the law. Going out here, getting involved in sexual orgies, doing all kinds of drugs, getting involved in all kinds of stuff that they never should be getting involved in addition to the underhand scenarios that's been going on in the past towards them actually being the part of bringing in the drugs. In other words, the American people are getting played both ways. We're getting played by these same people that are burning the candle on both ends. And the American people are now starting to wake up to it towards, just exactly what is going on. How come there is 2.3 million incarcerated prisoners in local and state and federal jails? How come we are 23 minus a few $1 billion towards being on our national debt? How come we are discovering in regard to all these massive shootings and all these massive opioids that's been distributed all over the countryside in addition to all the other drugs? It's simply because we was bamboozled as common folk, and we put these people in power to do a particular job, and they was not doing it. They gave the appearance of doing it, but in reality, all they was doing was playing the public. They was playing the public for everything that the public was worth. And I tend to wonder if a lot of them isn't going to be willing to play this thing all the way out to the end, to the point that we have to default. We have to start all over again, because you've got certain politicians that I guarantee you does not have a lick of conscience whenever it comes to them going to bed at night and looking themselves in the mirror in the morning. They do not have a bit of guilt in how that they're playing the public for everything that the public is worth. And once more, I'm talking about the common folk. I'm talking about the people that didn't go to college and get all these degrees and are not lawyers and judges and don't know that much about the system. The system has become corrupt. And Donald Trump brought that out in his running for election, that the swamp needed to be drained, that the system was rigged. But now, since Donald Trump has gotten in there, instead of him becoming part of the solution to the problem, now he's become part of the problem. In other words, he got sucked into it. Or did he get sucked into it? Maybe he deliberately walked into it, because what does the Bible say? That sinners love sinners. Sinners take care of sinners. In other words, the rich and the powerful take care of the rich and the powerful, and could care less about the common folk. Now we're starting to wake up, and now our eyes is beginning to start focusing on the real truth towards what's actually happening here.
I want to push back a little on the idea that we've proven, or we have the evidence to support an obstruction charge at this point. Let's stipulate that no president that any of us can think of in American history would make the kind of improper request that Trump made to Zelensky. But let's also stipulate that no White House, facing leaks of the president's phone calls with foreign leaders, wouldn't take drastic action to restrict access to those transcripts or notes of those meetings. So, and the fact that they began doing it long before this phone call undercuts the idea that the restricted access on the Zelensky phone call was an act of obstruction, because it was it was arguably an act to prevent leaks that any White House would have taken.
Let's ask Glenn Kirshner and Barbara McQuaid if you agree.
Yeah, here's my concern, whether we call it obstruction or not, it's so blatantly un-American. Think about it. You have people around the president who, after the president fired James Comey, he invites the Russians in and he tells them, hey, the pressure's off, I fired the nut job. Now we know, Joy, that there was more to that conversation, including him saying to the Russians, and you know, that whole interference thing that y'all just did, not a big deal as far as I'm concerned. That is a wink and a nod to continue the interference on Trump's behalf. And then you have these people circling around the president and saying, even though the president just told our enemies about that, we need to now secrete it, hold it under wraps, and not let the American people know that's the president's position. I think that is so dramatically un-American, and it sure seems criminal.
And Barbara, do you think anyone here has any legal exposure for having hidden those transcripts?
I think so. You know, an essential element of obstruction of justice is a corrupt intent. So not just the fact that you locked them down, but the reason that you locked them down. And facts matter. So I think investigating what the purpose was in locking down those transcripts is going to be essential here before we can conclude whether there was criminal intent.
And David Corn, who do you want to see on that witness list for the House impeachment inquiry next?
Well, I think I want to see H.R. McMaster. You give me one guy, I'm going for him. He was the National Security Advisor at the time of that conversation that Glenn just referenced in the White House. He knows if Trump told the Russians, hey, it's okay, I'm not concerned about your attack on the United States to help get me elected president.
Yeah.
So, you know, they bring him up, they may claim executive privilege, but there's a key thing. Executive privilege does not count when the question is treason.
Same question to you, John.
There you go.
Yeah, I think H.R. McMaster would be someone good to talk to. Bill Barr needs to be talked to. He needs to. I don't know if you've shown the clip of Senator Harris during Barr's confirmation hearing.
We will.
Where she asks him what turned at the time we're like, why is she asking him this question?
Yeah.
Now in this context. Now I think we know why she was asking that question. Now I want to hear the answer.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind seeing Pompeo, but yeah, we're going to see Pompeo. Well, there's a lot maybe we could see. We could do a whole list. Jonathan Capehart, Barbara McQuaid, Michael Isikoff, Glenn Kirshner, David Corn, thank you guys very much. Naveed is going to be back after the break. And coming up, we'll show you the President of the United States flippantly talking about killing a whistleblower's White House sources. That's next.
Once more, you can plead executive privilege all you want, which is basically the same thing as pleading the fifth. I refuse to answer any of these questions based around the fact that I may incriminate myself, okay? But once you find out the core of who was involved in all this, towards all the policies that has been broken, and then you dig a little deeper towards finding out what was the motive, the intent in behind all this, I think David, that is one of Tennessee's representatives, I believe he is, I think that you'll find that it does reach the level of treasonous. Treasonous level, according to the books, is expanded upon in a very, very rough way, to say the least, pertaining to those that get caught with high crimes like this, are starting to be caught in high crimes.
The game, the whistleblower. Who's the person who gave the whistleblower the information? Because that's close to a spy. You know what we used to do in the old days when we were smart, right? With spies and treason. We used to handle it a little differently than we do now.
That is what the belief in your own impunity sounds like. Donald Trump on camera stating in very clear and chilling language that he and his attorney general have no intention of protecting the whistleblower who informed our country about Trump's scheme to solicit election interference from Ukraine in the attempts to cover it up. In fact, Trump wants to know who told the whistleblower what was ultimately revealed to Congress and the public. And in the old days, he says, people who told would be punished by death. Acting DNI Joseph McGuire had a very different take on the whistleblower when he testified to Congress this week.
to weigh in on what he was talking about pertaining to whistleblower. A whistleblower is an informant. A whistleblower is somebody who is willing to put himself or herself on the line towards exposing the illegitimacies that they have witnessed or are witnessing pertaining to a crime. David and I knew without a shadow of a doubt that the 3 children that was living across the street over here was being entangled in an atmosphere that they should not have been exploited into. Because we took it upon to ourselves to pay close attention to the couple that was across the road, it wound up backfiring on us to the point that I had to plead guilty to a crime that I never should have pleaded guilty to, because the way the system had me cornered, me spending 37 days in jail illegitimately towards trying to do a good Samaritan deed. David and I both. Of course, my brother died during that situation. The coroner said that he died of a massive heart attack. I question whether or not it was a massive heart attack or he just died because of all the stress that was being illegitimately put upon to his life into this area. But the fact of the matter is, we was trying to do the good deed by contacting Child Abuse Center up in Nashville, as well as the local Child Abuse Center here in this county, and it backfired. Just like it backfired whenever I went down to Mount Carmel and I found out the truth about how that the FBI had entrapped those poor people that obviously was demented in some sort of way towards following after an occult leader pertaining to David Koresh. But whenever I found out that the FBI had entrapped them people by selling them guns, automatic assault rifles, AK-47s, and the same type of guns that was being sold down on the border of the Rio Grande, I knew then that I was stepping off into something that was totally illegitimate pertaining to state and federal governments, especially whenever I entwined my life into the Oklahoma incident that I helped to manifest the documentary called The Noble Lie, that only discusses a deeper part of the truth, but not the whole truth, in regard to that bombing that took place in 1995 out in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Whenever you have the blind leading the blind, according to the Bible, not according to my words, but according to Jesus' words, you're going to have not only the blind that's going to lead it off into the ditch, but he's going to lead the others that he's leading off into the ditch too as well. They both shall lead it off into the ditch. And that's exactly where this American government is now in. We have been subsequently put off into an area that is bringing extreme, dire peril into people's lives because things was not handled professionally and promptly in regard to state, local, as well as federal governments pertaining to a cover-up that began in 1988 after 9 tapes circled into the White House of biblical Bible prophecy that was to be exposed promptly and professionally before the world. And because it did not get promptly and professionally exposed to the world in not only the political arena, but also within the church arena, it has thrown this country off into a state of peril. Danger, danger, Will Rogers. Danger, 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 danger. The computer keeps blinking off and on red. danger, danger, danger. And at this point in time, in my particular life, I understand history as being a history buff. And I understand that without the whistleblowers, without the informants that was working the grounds during the time of the birth of this great country, during the time of George Washington, we as a free world society would not be a free world society if it was not for informants, if it was not for whistleblowers. Because these people was willing to put their lives on the line knowing that our existence as a Democrat, Republican democracy would not exist if they did not conduct their duties in the way of and as towards being a whistleblower or a informant. It's only because those individuals, and trust me, a lot of them died. A lot of them got executed. A lot of them got hung. 231 years ago, this country over here in America was not like we see it today as far as having the freedoms that we have. People put their lives on the line. People was willing to sacrifice their very own families so that you and I could have the things that we're enjoying today pertaining to the Constitution that was written by the builders, by the framers, by the birth of this nation. And now we have a president that basically wants to draw and quarter these people because they was doing their jobs up in the White House towards red flagging something that was said that never should have been said, or the content that it was said in. Which means just as much a lot of times as what was said. Let's listen to this because it's heartbreaking, to say the least, that we have got such of a abscess, such of a contamination here in America that is only festering, growing, and intensifying and getting worse. And until the American people are willing to stand up and say enough is enough pertaining to these illegitimacies, these irregularities that are going on, I'm pretty sure they're just going to get worse and worse and worse. And to me, it's kind of like a person that's trying to go up a big mountain, and every time they grab a hold of a root or they think that they have a good footing, instead of going up the cliff, in actuality, they're sliding down the cliff. And they continue to do this again and again and again, and eventually they're going to slide all the way down to the bottom. Now, the $64,000 question is this. Once America gets down to the bottom of the gorge, bottom of the cliff, bottom of the canyon, what's going to become of us then? Because that's exactly where we're heading as a nation that's almost $23 trillion in debt and 2.3 million incarcerated state, local, and federal prisoners. Please listen to this. This is worthwhile listening to. This will be the latter part of this particular sequence on the Windmill Ministries message. And once more, we cannot dictate or elaborate on good luck to all of us enough.
I think the whistleblower did the right thing.
Can we agree that it was urgent?
It was urgent and important.
You don't have any reason to accuse them of disloyalty to our country or suggest they're beholden to some other country?
Sir, absolutely not.
Do I have your assurance that the whistleblower will be able to testify fully and freely and enjoy the protections of the law?
Yes, Congressman.
Naveed Jamali is back with me, and joining us is Rosa Brooks, former Pentagon official and the author of How Everything Became War and the Military Became Everything. And Rosa, I want to play you no less than Chris Wallace of Fox News talking about the way that this whistleblower has been spoken about, and I presume included by the president.
The spinning that's been done by the president's defenders over the last 24 hours since this very damaging whistleblower complaint came out, the spinning is not surprising, but it is astonishing and I think deeply misleading. What is clear from reading the complaint is that it is a serious allegation, that a lot of it has proven to be borne out already. To dismiss this as a political hack, it seems to me to be an effort by the president's defenders to try to make nothing out of something, and there is something here.
What do you make of the attempt to, turn the conversation to negative information about this unknown whistleblower, and even Donald Trump's seeming threat to the people who spoke to this person?
Yeah, it's somewhat worse than just the classic blame the messenger, shoot the messenger. This is threatened to shoot the messenger and everybody who gave messages to the messenger and everybody who gave messages to the people who gave messages to the messenger. No, it's scary. It creates an atmosphere of intimidation. Obviously, what we do know about this whistleblower is that the whistleblower is a public servant who followed the rules as Trump's own head of national intelligence.
Exactly.
He followed all of the rules. He did not do what Edward Snowden did.
Right.
And go leaking to the press or leaking to foreign governments.
Right.
He used all of the appropriate internal channels to report something that concerned him. And now he's essentially being threatened by the President of the United States.
Right.
I hope for his sake that additional details about it, and I may be wrong to assume it's a him, the identity of that whistleblower get out, because I think we've seen that when this president makes veiled threats, that some of his supporters take them seriously, and it turns into actual bombs and death threats. So it's a very scary situation.
Yeah, and as somebody who's worked in this intelligence world, Naveed, what does it do to future people who might have the same have the same courage to come forward and talk about threats to national security when the President of the United States is saying whoever told this person anything back in the day, we'd have killed them?
Yeah, I mean, it has a chilling effect. Look, for 10 years, I carried around a little card that basically laid out my duties as an intelligence officer in terms of intelligence oversight. My job was not just to guard secrets, but if I saw something in terms of the collection of intelligence that was illegal, I had a duty to report it. And that is something that the American public has to have trust and faith in the intelligence community, that we keep secrets not to protect presidents, but to protect this nation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. 100%. And whenever it comes to civilian duties under the Good Samaritan laws, we as citizens have that same responsibility. That's the whole primary reason for being able to go to the voting booths and vote, not only to cast your ballot, but also if you're ever called upon towards doing jury trial. It is our duty to do the right thing, not to turn our heads. And if we see something or hear something or know something that sounds wrong, that is giving out the wrong signal, the wrong image, we as a society are supposed to step up to the plate and say, hey, I'm making a telephone call to the people that can do something about this. And that's exactly what David and I was enforcing out here at 291 Thompson Road. And instead of us being rewarded for it, after my brother died, I got punished for it. The same thing as me going and investigating what actually happened in Mount Carmel in Texas, pertaining to the Davidians, the 51-day standoff, compiling that with what went on in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Instead of me being rewarded for what that I was going beyond the call of duty, towards driving all the way out there with my own dime, doing what I was doing towards investigating and getting hands-on testimony from not only various occult leaders out there pertaining to the Davidians, but also going house to house within a 5-mile radius and getting testimonies from various community citizens in that area and finding out just exactly what did happen. That took a lot of time. It took a lot of resources. And it also took a lot of guts for me to stand up into the eyes of the general public. And once more, instead of being rewarded because of my work, I have been chastised. I have been punished. I have been looked upon in the eyes of society, because this is how various government officials wanted me to look. Because of their guilt and their shame, they throwed it off like I was the bad guy. No, 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 no. I was not the bad guy. Neither nor is this whistleblower that's doing their job. Once more, we're not talking about an Eric Snowden individual that blowed the whistle and then run like hell because he knew that he had violated his own principles and his own policies pertaining to the corrupt system that he was a part of. You keep in mind, he was probably making almost $100 grand a year or over whenever he done that. He was part of the system. And because his conscience would not allow for him to continue on watching that without throwing up a red flag, he throwed a red flag. But the problem is, he did not go about throwing the red flag in the proper form. And maybe that's the reason why that I'm being punished. Maybe that's the reason why that I continue to be demonized and dehumanized, is because I didn't take it through certain channels towards doing it in the proper way. Well, you know what? Whenever you're dealing with corruption and when you're dealing with this much illegitimacies, odds are you're not going to find the proper channels. Because the channel that you go to is, if they're not guilty of the situation that you're dealing with, the problem at hand, they're going to try to protect those who was guilty. That's the reason why Donald Trump made a statement by saying that the system was rigged. The system was rigged. The thing about Donald Trump is he got caught up into the same web towards trying to act like that he was going to fix the system. And now, instead of him becoming the solution to the problem, he's become part of the problem. And that's what happens to a lot of good elected officials. They'll make all kinds of promises towards the people, the general people, down here, the common folk. But then whenever they get to Washington, because of fear tactics, intimidation tactics, because of too much enticing greed, whatever, they do the very opposite of what they actually promised the American people. And they become just as corrupt as the people that they said, sworn off, that they was going to go up against. They become part of the problem instead of the solution to the problem. So we personally give the whistleblower that has done their duties in this particular task 2 thumbs up. And I pray to God that they do not try to ruin his or her life the way that they have other people that has brought forth the truth to the American citizens. Once more, under the Good Samaritan laws, we are committed of doing the right thing. And if we do not do the right thing, then we become an entity that is just as guilty as those that committed the crime. You become an accessory to the fact, an accessory to the crime, by not speaking out and by not stepping up to the plate as a good moral citizen and saying enough is enough.
And part of the check that we have to make sure that that holds true is the whistleblower avenue. And to think that a whistleblower saw wrongdoing, spoke out, and wrongdoing committed by the person who holds the highest office in this country, and spoke out and did the right thing and followed their oath of office, and is now being threatened. The president basically implied that he should be killed. This is something that is shocking. It's going to have an effect, and the American people should be grateful that we have this whistleblower avenue, that this is part of the checks and balances that keeps this country nothing short of safe.
Yeah, just to be clear, he said he threatened that the people who told him information are spies, and back in the day he said they used to kill spies. Let's talk. Let me play you a flashback. We talked about it in the last block a little bit. They kind of teed it up. This is Kamala Harris, Senator Kamala.
Back in what day? Back in what day? Because back in the day, whenever this government was formed, that's the only reason why that this government was formed, was because of spies. If you know anything about George Washington and know anything about the history of this great nation, of how we had to defeat the Redcoats, you'll identify real quick that if it wasn't for people that was willing to put their lives on the line towards exposing the truth and bringing transparency towards what was going on here, you'll find out that instead of the whistleblowers or the informants being punished, they was rewarded back then towards developing a brand new country. It was the birth of our great nation, towards stepping away from that type of tyranny that was trying to rule illegitimately our lives to the point that we did not have say-so like we do today. How far back in the day? What day is he talking about? Because he obviously has been misschooled in areas that I'm not aware of pertaining to the American history.
William Barr, and this was back in May. Take a listen.
Has the president or anyone at the White House ever asked or suggested that you open an investigation of anyone? Yes or no, please, sir?
The president or anybody else?
Seems you'd remember something like that and be able to tell us.
Yeah, but I'm trying to grapple with the word suggest. I mean, there have been discussions of matters out there that they have not asked me to open an investigation. But
perhaps they've suggested?
I don't know. I wouldn't say suggest.
Hinted?
I don't know.
Inferred? You don't know. Okay.
Rosa Brooks, there is an implication that there is an investigation going on into the origins of the Russia probe into Donald Trump's campaign. And it seems that that Donald Trump's world believes that the origins of this were in this sort of crackpot theory that it started with for the late Seth Rich and Ukraine. So could it be possible that this very obedient Attorney General could be attempting to make real this conspiracy theory through an investigation that has something to do with Ukraine?
Oh, sure. I think we have several things going on. One, Barr may be telling the truth in the sense that we already know. You had Michael Cohen, clip from Michael Cohen earlier in the show. Donald Trump doesn't say, I order you to open this investigation. He says, as we saw in that phone call with Ukraine's president, he says, we could like you to do us a favor, though. And Barr's not an idiot. When the President of the United States says, do us a favor, open this investigation, it's not exactly an order, but you do it. If you do it, at least if your primary goal is keeping your job and pleasing the President rather than following your constitutional oath. But I also think that the bigger thing that is going on here, and it's exactly what you said, this is the big lie theory of politics. When there is dirt that is coming your way that you deserve, you try to shovel dirt onto everybody else, and if you have to just make stuff up, you make stuff up. You say, aha, it was, Joe Biden subverting our elections. Oh, it was some, I could say, Joy, why are you subverting our elections? And that's what they do. There does not have to be any truth to it, but they say it over and over and over, and they get people to start believing it.
Yeah, and perhaps start investigating or making up investigations to try to make it seem real. Naveed Jamali, Rosa Brooks, thank you both very much. Really appreciate your time. And more AM after the break.
It's the kind of game you clear your schedule for and stock up for. It's the kind of game with so much star power